Hi, everybody. I'm Ralph Ben-Murgy. Welcome to Not That Kind of Rabbi, my podcast. As always, I'm not a rabbi. I'm a spiritual director, but I'm not a rabbi. I often say if I was going to be a rabbi, I wouldn't be that kind of rabbi. And today, I have someone who I'll be speaking to who is a rabbi, but he's not that kind of rabbi. So I think we're in a perfect circle here. I met him originally years ago. He's one of the founders of a beautiful outreach program called Ve'ahavta, and was deeply involved in helping people literally on a street level to be able to say, we could talk all we want, but it's service that matters, and he did it. His name is Avrum Rosensweig. He is a rabbi, and he is my guest. Hello, sir. Hello, Rabbi. How are you?
Hey, Ralph. How you doing?
I'm good. It's been a while since we've seen each other. We've both gotten more gray.
Yes, which is a good thing. It reflects perhaps more wisdom as well, eh?
Well, God willing. I mean, I'm fond of saying to people, just because you're older doesn't mean you're wiser. You do have to do the work, I think. But
that's true.
We could talk about all that. So get me up to speed. When we were interacting, you were very much the driving force of Ve'ahavta. Mm-hmm. But a year ago was sort of that closed. So what put you in that position where you could move from being in it to advising it to saying goodbye to it?
Right. I was very, very passionate about Ve'ahavta, and I was indeed the founder. Started it up in 1996. We had our programming going in 1997, and I ran it for about 20 years. I just knew intuitively it was time to move on. The organization grew beautifully, and we had all kinds of wonderful people working with us, great donors, great projects. And I was limited in terms of where I could take it moving further. I often ask people, are you an opening pitcher? Are you a middle innings pitcher? Or are you a closer? I'm an opener. Despite that, I stayed in the game for many years. And there just came a point where Ve'ahavta was growing. And as a founding director, I realized, listen, either I stay in here and it just doesn't grow the way I want it to in my heart, or I step aside and I do other things in my life. I allow someone else to take it forward. And that's, in fact, what I did. I always felt, Ralph, that I wanted Ve'ahavta to outlive me, and in fact, it's run now by Carrie Kozerick. She does a tremendous job. We're very good friends. I help her out where I can. I just really, really felt strongly it was time for me to move on and do other stuff. I was very passionate while I was doing it, but it was just time to move on,
So something you just said there, though, was it wasn't going to go where you and your heart wanted it to go. Where did you want it to go?
Listen, in my mind, I really felt that I would take Ve'ahavta international. Now, we did do international work, and we did great work in places like Zimbabwe and Guyana and Haiti. We worked with Israel, etc. But really, the brunt of our work and what Ve'ahavta is known for is our work here with the homeless in Toronto. But I sort of have a limited capacity to grow it in that way. I'm a small town guy, and I operate that way. And I just felt really strongly I didn't have the ability to take it to bigger places. Carrie does, and I felt it was really the time just to move over. It's really not more complicated than that. And the other thing too is I'm not a born administrator. I'm really not. Right. If you've ever run a shop and you're involved in hiring and firing and Excel sheets and all that Narishkeit, which is Yiddish for, nonsense. That's not my thing, Ralph. It's really not.
Right.
And so often I bemoan the fact that I really want to be a hands-on guy, sometimes one-on-one. I didn't have that opportunity anymore as the executive director. So it was time to do other stuff.
So, what did it teach you? What did that whole organization, what did the work on the street, what did it teach you?
You know, when you're dealing with individuals who've had an extraordinarily hard life and perhaps do not have the blessings that you and I have, you realize very quickly a few things. Number one is you realize humility within people. I just got off the phone, literally, Ralph, before you and I started this interview with a fellow whom I've known for a number of years. And I really don't know anyone who has as much tourists as this fellow, which is hardships. And he was crying on the phone with me, and he's a grown man. He's actually a very strong man, but he just stopped drinking recently. He stopped taking opioids, and when you go through that process, your mind does clear, but the emotions come to the fore very often. And he breaks down regularly now. And I'm on the phone with this man, Ralph, and I'm thinking to myself, God, life can be so challenging. It can be so hard. That man's gone through so much. And I feel so strongly that I need to have such patience and respect for him, listen so closely. If I can help, then I need to help. So what it's taught me is that the humility is very important in humankind. It's taught me that one must be strong in our life and in our world, and that we have to be together. We have to be a unit. We have to be unified in order to get through it, because life can be very tough, as you know.
Well, let's talk about humility, but also about whether or not, when you devote yourself to that kind of a struggle, whether or not there are supports around you to continue doing it. So humility, I'll sort of go to the Musar version of humility here, and the idea that it's not about making yourself smaller in the face of things. It's knowing what place to take in a situation, when to lead, when to follow, when to listen, when to talk. So when you talk about the humility, the other factor when one is doing good work is how we can swell up and believe, look at me, I'm doing great stuff. What are you doing with your life? So how did you balance those different urges in yourself? Because you started this as a younger man, and, we can work more from ego than from soul when we're younger. So how did that journey go for you?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I thought I was pretty special. I think the best way to sort of position my answer is, one of the ways that Viehafta raised money was through our galas. They were called Starry Nights galas. And we would have keynote speakers such as Bob Geldof, Mia Farrow, Miriam Pearl, whose husband was beheaded by ISIS, and Elie Wiesel. So there I am sitting on the dais with them, in some ways thinking of myself as a small town Kitchener kid, which is where I was born. By the way, just as a correction here, my father was the rabbi. I'm a son of a rabbi.
Okay.
Son of many things, but son of a rabbi, and not a rabbi. I don't have smicha.
So we're both not that kind of rabbi.
We're both not that type of rabbi. Exactly. Together, Ralph. Together.
Excellent.
So I'm sitting there, and Bob Geldof is making jokes, and he's talking about me in front of hundreds of people. I think he called me the Jewish Jimi Hendrix because my hair is very often Afro-like in nature. And I'm getting a big kick out of this, walking through the crowds, Avrum this, Avrum that. Then afterwards, I would always leave, and I would make an effort to be on my own. It was late at night, and I would go into a coffee time. And I inevitably, I would see a bunch of men sitting there debating the world's ills, And I'm sitting there thinking, A, they have no idea who I am. How could they? Why would they? I'm known in the Viehafta world, but not outside of it. And I'm listening to their conversation, and I'm realizing, Merrick, that we're all just kind of like that, just like neighborhood guys, And it really put me in my place. And then the other thing, of course, Ralph, is when you work with people who are really put upon in life. As we discussed before, I became more and more and more humble. I really did. Like, I realized that like life is not riches. It's not wealth. It's not the materialism that you gather. It's the people that you help. It's the people that you work with. And when you work with people who are very, very, as I said, put upon, you quickly realize that life is so tenuous. Really, there's such a fine line between those who have and who have a lot, and those who have very, very little. And I woke up, so to speak, and I realized just a normal, regular guy. That's all I am, and I do my best in life.
When you work with somebody on the street,
Yeah.
does it, in a way, some of it must be like being in the middle of someone drowning. How do you, so in bronze medallion, they say, do not approach someone drowning from the front because they'll take your hair and pull you down so they can survive. How did you navigate that kind of caring without drowning?
By the way, I learned that about life-saving in Lubavitch camp when I was 8 years old. And then I implemented it in Mexico. I actually saved the guy's life, and it was good I had learned it. It's a really good question, because you can be pulled down very, very quickly. I think one of the things that anyone in the field has to do is to create, as you said before, it's a family. It's a group of people who surround you and you surround them, right? You hold their hand and they hold yours. There were many times where I would come home at the end of the day and be in tears at what I had seen, or what I was privy to, what we were working on. As I said before, we did a lot of work in Guyana, and Guyana is the Western Hemisphere's poorest country after Haiti. And we would go deep into the rainforest and set up medical clinics and help people who had about $1 worth of medical care per year. We in Canada have about $1,500 worth per year, on average. And you can imagine a mother walking miles and miles to get to us, maybe one baby on one hip and another baby on another hip, and begging us, we Canadian Jewish doctors and nurses, to save their child. These are really daunting things. And I remember a child who came into one of our camps, one of our clinics, who had fallen into a boiling pot of hot water. And fortunately, we had satellite phones and we were in touch with sick kids, and we were able to save that child's life. But you really have to make sure that you defrag, if you will, that you speak to people on a regular basis about what you're going through and how you're feeling. And when a point comes where you either need a vacation or you need to step aside, and that's probably a piece of why it was time for me to step aside too, then you have to do it. You can't bullshit yourself and say, I can do this. I'm strong. I can get through it. Yeah, there are varying degrees of strength out there, and you'll meet people in the field who are unbelievably powerful and strong. But everybody at some point breaks down, and you have to be conscious and aware of that. And if you're not, someone tells you whom you trust, you need to listen to them.
I was thinking for a second there just now that Steely Dan had a song called Kid Charlemagne.
Right.
And there's a line in it: "You are obsolete. Look at all the white men on the street."
Good.
And whenever I'm walking around and I'm seeing people begging, and I think, what have we done? Like, how can we walk past it, or decide we like the pitch of this beggar, but we don't like the pitch of this beggar? What is it? There must have been parts of you that were just like, wanted to shake the society by the shoulders and go, what are we doing? Right?
So when I first got into the nonprofit sector, that would have been 1990, and I worked for the United Jewish Appeal, and I did so for 7 years. My father was a rabbi, and my mother was a rebbitzin, and I grew up in Kitchener until I came to yeshiva in Toronto in grade 9, and I finished yeshiva, and then I went to Israel for a year and studied there. But the thing about my family, in particular my father, was that he was an old-time rabbi, an old-time activist. So he used to bring people home and live with us, who would live with us. So I often say my mother was the real hero.
Hmm.
So we literally had people staying with us for a week, for a month, sometimes for a couple of years. And very often the people who lived with us were challenging folk. We had one woman who stole my parents' visa and went downtown and spent it in some Jewish stores, and they let us know. And we asked her why. She just said she never, had the opportunity to spend money like that, but that was her appreciation. But my parents never kicked her out. I mean, they were really the real deal, Ralph. My parents were
Right.
the real deal. So I came to UJ, and I had what you might call sort of a chip on my shoulder. It's like, this is where I came from. I saw what was going on in the world at a young age, and I was privy to the world outside of me, outside of us, more so than my colleagues. And I used to get really, really angry. I remember sitting around UJA meetings with my colleagues and just really hitting them on the head with a hammer. Come on, where are you? The Russian Jews are coming out. We need to take them in. We need to have our house for Shabbat, and let's open up our doors. And they looked at me and they didn't quite know what I was saying because they were professional, community workers. Finally, I looked around and I realized nobody was fighting back. It was only me who was fighting.
Right.
And I told myself, I remember saying this to myself, okay, Avrum, you know what? A boxer who's in the ring by himself, that's not a true not a true fight. So just stop. And at that point in time, what I started to do instead was I tried to influence people in the area of what I knew, what I had experienced, in a softer, perhaps more loving way, and kill people with sweetness and honey. And to some extent that worked. But, Ralph, I'm sure you're like this because of your life and what you've pursued. Sometimes I become acutely aware of the suffering in the world or in a given country, like Ethiopia right now, in Tigray. I have a friend there who keeps emailing me, telling me about the atrocities. And sometimes I'm so conscious of the suffering of these people. I can see it, I can feel it, that I really do want to go out there and beat up our community and say, let's get off our butts and let's do something real, as opposed to speaking or articles in newspapers and all that stuff, which does have a place, but at the end of the day, it needs to be more.
Yeah. I was talking to a rabbi down in the United States, Mordechai Liebling, who's an activist rabbi in Philadelphia. And we were talking about the idea that, right now at synagogues and mosques and churches, there's a social action committee. Everybody has a social action committee, and that's great. And their focus in the Jewish world would be to say tikkun olam, repair of the world.
Right.
But we ended up with a conversation about, before, or at least at the same time as you have that desire, there has to be tikkun hanefesh, repair of the soul. Because otherwise you bring the baggage to the fight, as it were, or to the cause. And maybe that stuff is really not helpful. Maybe it's polluting. So when you were talking about, bang them over the head with a hammer, I can see where a frustration would make a person go, for God's sake, do something about this already. But on the other hand, where has that sat with you over the years, the repair of your own soul to be able to help with the repair of the world?
Right. I found out not so long ago, after spending years studying Torah, that not only is there the concept of bein adam lamakom, which means my relationship with God, and bein adam lechavero, which means my relationship with my friends, my community, my family, but there's a concept called bein adam la'atzmi. And bein adam la'atzmi means my relationship to myself.
Right.
So I discovered this, and I quickly realized there's very little talk about bein adam la'atzmi in the yeshiva world, where I come from. Not entirely surprising because of how they approach life, but my Rosh Hashanah and my Yom Kippur started to change, because I wasn't only doing all chaitz to develop my relationship with God more so. That's when you clap yourself on the chest.
I
Not
lie,
only
I
to,
cheat, I steal. Yeah.
right, I gossip,
I
right? We all do
gossip.
all that stuff,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Not only to determine how I've been with my friends and my family, my community, how I can better myself, but I really started thinking about myself more so.
Hmm.
And that was a really healthy place to go, and it was within a Jewish context. Your point is really well taken. I've often wondered about Sarah and Abraham, Sarah and Abraham, when Abraham and his wife were standing at the opening to their tent, and they were literally, I mean, the Torah tells us that they were literally waiting for someone to come by that they could help, right?
Yeah.
And of course, three angels came by, and this wasn't long after Avram had gone through a circumcision, so clearly he was in pain. And I thought to myself, do they have a drive to help others? And is that necessarily a healthy thing all the time? We're very complimentary about Abraham and Sarah there, sort of the model for hospitality, what it should be. But on the other hand, we've all met social workers who are far more intent upon sort of dealing with their own stuff than the person standing in front of them, and that's problematic. So I've been thinking about that over time as well. And I guess the bottom line is, as you're saying, is, in the vernacular, work through your own shit.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
It's
because it
important.
keeps coming up, right? I
It
mean,
does. Yeah, it's there.
yeah. And it's like, so when you say, I lie, I cheat, I steal, I cheat myself. I lie to myself. I steal
Yeah,
from myself
right.
is an entirely different thing than I have behaviors that outwardly to other people that are not what I would like.
Correct.
Because cheating yourself and the whole idea of sin in Judaism isn't about an evil act. It's about bad aim,
Yes. That
right?
ain't good.
Bad aim. Like the Buddhists would say, an unskilled approach to life,
Very good. Yeah.
right? And the skillfulness is what we want, because the situations are going to come up all the time anyway. It's just a
Yeah.
question of what can we do. So when so leaving Wehrhafta would be leaving a piece of identity as well. I am Avrum Rosensweig from Wehrhafta. For 20 years, you get to say that, and it's a beautiful thing. But I find, as we move into what I like to think of as the autumn of life, that the definition of who we were and who we are and all of those things are in transition. So what that year of transition you've been through, what's gone on for you? What are the things that have moved as pieces that weren't there before?
Mm-hmm. I was a little bit lost. I think I'm still a little bit lost. But Leonardo da Vinci had, I think, 8 or 10 rules that he lived by on a daily basis. As an example, you have to be physical every day. You have to work out. You have to sweat, right? One of his rules was you have to embrace confusion. Tohu vavohu. Right? In the beginning, God created the world, and he created it from tohu vavohu, right? Which was, how would you define that?
No thing.
There you go. Right?
Yeah.
Nothing. Yeah.
Ein Sof,
Right. So I've worked really hard to embrace my tohu vavohu, Ralph.
Right.
I really have. Like it's actually extremely exciting, while it's scary too, to remove myself from that sort of the hafta rubric, and to say, okay, yeah, for 20 years you were Avram from Via Hafta, and that's how I go over to Metro here and I go shopping. Oh, you're Avram from Via Hafta, right? Yeah, that's correct. I'm Avram from Via Hafta, right? But it's exciting to let go of that and to discover and or rediscover who I am at my essence. It's as if I'm on a deserted island and there's nobody around to define me, no books, really nothing outside of me which says, okay, you're Avram this, you're Avram this. And now what I'm doing is I'm reaching deeply inside, and I'm discovering new pieces of myself. And that is a beautiful journey. I'm enjoying it very much.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was just talking to somebody earlier today and I offered to them I felt that they had a yearning for certainty. And I said, sometimes it might be good to stay confused, right?
Right.
The Chinese proverb to be uncertain is uncomfortable, to be certain is ridiculous,
Mhm.
right? Because we want an answer. It's like the difference between a kind of searching in your spiritual life and a certainty in your spiritual life. And we can see how that goes, because it's when somebody tells me in detail what the afterlife looks like. And I'm like, come on.
Right. Right.
It's
Right.
a ballpark guess at best. Come on.
Yeah. Listen, I'm grateful. Thanks for telling me, but really, like,
Yeah,
this,
yeah, exactly. Wow.
Right.
Do you have flyer points I can pick up for this? Because I want a little visit. What's going to kill me? Um, Now, so part of your redefinition, and I want to know how you got there, is this idea of becoming a purpose and meaning coach. How did that grow over this last period of time, and how does it manifest itself now?
I think one of the things that my parents taught my sisters and myself was to be cognizant, of somebody standing in front of you, as I mentioned before, and B, to be sincerely interested in who they are. And my sisters and I have always gone out of our way to spend a little bit of time, with the cashier at No Frills, or the guy who runs the dry cleaners. You're in an Uber or you're in a cab. I'm sure you're like this. You probably strike up a schmooze with the guy or the woman driving. My parents taught us well in that way. And therefore, as I grew, as I got older, as my life developed, I really, really developed with that a fascination for humankind, people's behavior, who people are at their essence, the core of their soul and their spirit. And of course, along came Viktor Frankl, in the guise of some really good books. And he developed logotherapy. And essentially, logotherapy was and is a therapy which states that if you find meaning in your life, if you find purpose in your life, that in itself is therapeutic, right? And that's been my experience. So over the years, I have informally struck up conversations with many strangers and asked them what it is that they're passionate about, what they do, what they love. And even if their answer, Ralph, is, well, I don't know, because you hear that from people. I don't know. You dig a little bit and you probe and you remind people that we were all once children and we all had dreams, maybe to be a boxer. I wanted to be a boxer when I was a kid,
Right.
And a lawyer and a rabbi. And I think I wanted to be a taxi driver too. Everybody has dreams. And if you remind them that you did, they may come to the fore. So I really wanted to continue to work with people. And if I was able to give of myself and help them develop, and of course, the flip side to that is help myself develop. I figured, okay, you know what? I'm working things through, and I'd like to try to coach people. And then, of course, when you decide you want to become a coach, the question is, what kind of coach? And it made a lot of sense to me, based on what I just told you, to really work with people and help them discover and or rediscover their passions and their meaning, to work for it. Because I tell you the truth, it's always there. It's always there. And so far, Baruch Hashem, as they say, it's been a good experience.
So I come to you and I downplay my passions. You say, what are your passions? I go, well, in a perfect world, I'd love to do this. I'd love to do that. I'd love to travel. I'd love to paint. Is that just the surface answer of I'd love to just not have to worry about my responsibilities in the world and just do something that whimsically is enjoyable? Do people often sort of start there?
Well, inevitably we get into conversations about their childhood and their parents and their relationships. And there's a lot of peripheral stuff that turns out to be extraordinarily important in terms of they finding their path. Generally, I work with people who have shown success in their life already. I'm not trained to do otherwise. I'm not trained to help people emotionally. That's not my training.
Right, right.
Um, but I am trained to listen, and I am trained to hopefully hear at least somewhat. And yes, there are people who do in fact respond well. Yeah, in a perfect world. But again, as I said before, if you dig deeply and if you really create an environment that's trusting, and you probe well, you and I have been trained to ask good questions, right?
Mm.
And I'm sure you've had your fair share of people saying, Ralph, you know what? No one's ever asked me that before. That's a good question, right? And then once you hear that, you feel you're on the right path. But it could take some time. Some coaches do 2 or 3 sessions with somebody. I generally find it's probably more important to do 5 or 10. And there have been times where I have not taken a person down a road that they were comfortable with. But more often than not, we do help. I am able to help them find their path, and they do go on it, and it's shown a lot of success.
It's interesting because I did the Aleph ordination program in spiritual direction, to be a
Yeah,
mashgiach, and it sounds like we're kind of doing the same kind of work in some ways. I'm helping sometimes. Often, I'm trying to reconnect people to their spiritual yearning and trying to give them a framework that can offer them some sustainable ways of animating that part of their life. Because a really nice walk in the woods and a nice buzzy feeling from that is nice, and the next day it's back to mundane kaboom kaboom. So it sounds like we're both doing some holy listening, really, right?
yeah. Which again, I think we're trained to do. Like you've been interviewing for years. You've had some high profile interviews. I know your career, and it kind of makes sense. This trajectory, I think, makes sense. It's not
Yeah,
surprising that we're on it.
yeah. So here we are, and here are the people that surround us in that. When you think of the place that your Judaism has in your path right now, is it a central piece of where you want to go still, or is it a part of things, but there's new things emerging as well?
Right. So I'll give you a very short history of my life. I grew up in an Orthodox environment. I was the only son, the only rabbinical son in my family. I have 4 sisters. One of my sisters died this year, so I have 3 sisters.
Sorry.
Yeah, thank you, thank you. And I went to yeshiva and I studied Torah. And then when I left yeshiva at 20 years old, after being there for 6 years, I gave up Orthodoxy. And I basically gave it up because I couldn't breathe. I really couldn't breathe. There was a lot of imposition in my life when it came to halacha, as you can imagine, being the only son of a rabbi, Jewish law, going to yeshiva, a very Haredi environment. That's the type of yeshiva that I went to, ultra right-wing Orthodox. There wasn't a lot of room to breathe. There wasn't a lot of room to wear colors. Remember once in Jerusalem, I was attending yeshiva, a Haredi yeshiva, and I was wearing white pants. And someone came over to me and they said, Mazach tachrichim. Tachrichim is Hebrew, and in English it means shrouds.
Right.
And
you got the wrong holiday. You should have been.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be Kippur, and you're supposed to be wearing a shroud. What are you doing?
Right.
That's right.
Exactly. So there would be a lot of that, and I wanted to test out the world. Like I wanted to try bacon.
Right. It's very salty. I remember.
I liked it. No, I liked it.
It's good, but salty.
Yeah. And I remember the first year that I gave up my Orthodoxy. I remember on Yom Kippur going to a Thai restaurant. And of course, there were all kinds of problems that came out of this. My family was not happy. My father was not happy. But that being said, I had to do it. And I see myself as being somewhat of the world. And I felt as though I was living in a shtetl.
Right.
So for many, many years, I rejected so much of what I had learned, and I was out there becoming a journalist, doing things that fascinated me, regardless of the halachic ramifications. And I was really, really happy. And the more that I did this stuff, the happier it made me. Right? I just felt free. Long and short of it, I became a father 15 years ago. And one thinks differently about their life when they're responsible for a little one who eventually starts to get to be a big one, what they say, how they say it, what their value system is, and so on. And that's basically what I had gone through. And I started to take my Judaism more seriously, if you will. I started to look at it differently. 2 years ago, I started up Daf Yomi. Now, Daf Yomi basically is a project or program whereby you study Talmud every single day for 7.5 years. And after 7.5 years, you complete the entire Shas, every single tractate that's out there. This Shabbat, I'll be finishing my 9th Gemara. I've never finished a Gemara in my life prior to this process. As I started to learn Talmud, Ralph, I started to learn more Chumash. And I started to learn Mesilat Yesharim, which is Musar. I was learning with my sister Naomi before she passed away. We had a chavruta. We would learn on a weekly basis together. Chavruta coming from the word friend.
Right.
We were learning friends, spiritual friends. And my mind is opening to what was very, very closed before. I'm starting to see the brilliance of our peoplehood. And I'm starting to see the beauty within our Torah and our learning. I'm starting to slowly but surely figure out this puzzle, which we call Torah and Judaism. I have not embraced halacha. That has not changed. But I am ensconced in learning Torah in a way I've never been before. And that's taking me down a road. I'm not exactly sure where that road is going. Sometimes I get off and I'll stay for a night in an inn.
With a cheeseburger. Yeah.
Yeah, a cheeseburger, right? But I'm going somewhere, and I've never been so proud of being a Jew.
Wow, isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
I guess it became your decision, not someone else's decision. I mean, when you're a young man, and it's, in Spanish, as a Spanish Moroccan, the word for sin is pecado. And you heard it about every 14 minutes when you were a kid. Pecado niño, don't do that. Pecado niño. So everything became what you couldn't do. And especially in a highly individualistic society, the idea that there was a collective constriction, that you had to be part of something where everybody was on the same page. Taken to its extreme, the Haredim and the whole idea of, everyone must look the same, do the same, be the same in the service of communal spirit and God, would be suffocating. I came from a traditional home, not an Orthodox home. So it was, if you asked my mother, she'd just say, what do you mean, why do we do this? Just do it. If you don't do it, we'll forget how to do it and it'll be gone. Right. And then I go to my Eastern European, my Ashkenazi friends for a Passover Seder where they'd have this freewheeling conversation about freedom. And it'd be like, are we going to finish the Haggadah or are we're just going to talk? Because we got to get through this and you can't miss stuff. So everybody gets their own stuff that gets rolled in, and then you have to move back. And then there is that thing, that retrieval mechanism called children, where you say, what am I passing on? And then you watch them go, nah, this is your path, go for it. And then they have to find their way. So, it's so interesting when that happens. So,
Ralph, I made a huge mistake with my son. My father had imposed so much upon me, God bless his soul. I understand why. And then I started doing the same thing with my son. And I have friends come up to me, they go, Avrum, this is what you rejected. You rejected that behavior towards you. Why are you doing it to your son? I said, no, it's not me. They said, no, that's you. You're doing it. And I looked at myself and I said, you're right. And I stopped. So now I'll make Shabbat table on Friday night, Kiddush, Lechem, all the things we do on Friday night. I'll say to my son, you know what? This is going to be really nice. Let's do it together. Sometimes he says yes. Sometimes he says no. And I let him be.
Yeah, it's tough.
It's
Because
very
the
tough.
other thing is when they say, look what you're doing, you say, this is what I know.
Yeah.
This is how I was brought up, and I don't have a roadmap. I mean, part of being a parent is if you can do 30% less of what wasn't a good idea, then you're getting somewhere.
I would say so, yes.
You know, I mean, in our culture, whacking your kid on the shoulder or the back of the head was grammar. It wasn't beating. It was, I'm trying to tell you something. You know,
Yeah.
that's what
Wake up.
wake
Yeah.
up. What is
Yeah.
wrong with you? Pecado, niño. So, you know, that became a thing. So then I have to go, okay, that I won't be doing that. I won't be getting physical with my kids. Bonus. I just moved the chain a little.
Yes.
So interesting. So your kid is going to have their journey. Your journey is now, I'm not going to say in flux, has evolved. What, when you, when occasionally the confusion clears and you can sort of get the glimmers of where you're going, where are you going? What do you see?
I'm going to go directly to this. When I leave this world, ad meva esrim, as we say, there's 120 to 120, right? I know Yiddish is your mother tongue. I know that as a Moroccan Jew, right?
Yeah, when we're eating gefilte fish, we always speak Yiddish. Always.
Right, with some Delfino.
Yeah, exactly.
Honestly, my the end game, as they call it, is I want to. Yeah, I know. I'm not sure how this sounds, but honestly, Ralph, I want to do as much good as possible. I want to. I want to really help people grow into themselves and live a life that's theirs, that they're supposed to be as best as they possibly can in the way that makes sense to them. Sometimes I actually think about keeping Shabbat. I haven't kept Shabbat since I'm 20 years old. And I often consider the idea that Avram, keep one Shabbat, just keep one Shabbat, see how it goes. You have to understand something. I felt choked during Shabbat.
Yeah.
How much more so on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur? I couldn't breathe. Almost
Right.
physically, I couldn't.
Right.
So to go back to it is a tough thing, and I really have to go back on my own conditions, as you were saying before. I have something that I want to do. Even crazier, I've thought recently about formalizing my Torah learning because I learned quite a bit, and I thought how interesting it would be if it could become a program, because there's wonderful Torah programs out there. The Hartman Institute is one
Yeah.
example, and etc. I mentioned to a couple of friends that who knows, maybe one day I'll go for smicha, and of course that's one's rabbinical ordination. So I'm starting to think in those terms,
Right.
and I'm not quite sure where I'm going to go with it, but something seems to be fleshing out.
Very interesting. So,
Yeah,
okay, let's go down the rabbit hole, shall we?
yeah,
So
please.
we go towards smicha, ordination. What have you had an instinct of what school of rabbinic learning you would be in? Would it be Reconstructionist, renewal, reform, conservative? What would it be?
Yeah, you're deep into that rabbit hole. You are.
Yeah.
Um, because that is a challenge that I have. When I was looking for a shul for my son and I to go to, a synagogue, here's what would happen. One Shabbat, we would go to Shar Shamayim, which is an Orthodox shul.
Right.
Well, that was too Orthodox. Another week, we would go to Darchei Noam, which is here on Shepherd Avenue, which is Reconstructionist. Can't take that seriously, right? And I know Rabbi Tina, she's lovely and she's wonderful and she's a great rabbi.
Right.
And this went on and on and on, and I just couldn't find my place, much to the chagrin of my son.
Hmm.
And so that is a really, really good question, and something that I'm still trying to figure out. I can't see myself getting a rabbinical ordination and going out for a cheeseburger. I don't see that. But
Right.
the strange thing, Ralph, is, and maybe you have some insight in this area. I'm not drawn to be halachic. I'm not. I'm not drawn to wake up in the morning and put on tefillin, make brachot, blessings on all of my food, and Friday night comes and I shut everything down. I understand the peacefulness of Shabbat, and I do feel it inside. But in terms of the ritual itself, I'm not highly ritualistic. So it's a challenge. On one hand, if I go the Reconstructionist route, I'm going to be very crass about this. Don't hold me to this. I don't take it seriously. It's not serious enough for me. It doesn't go through that whole process of, okay, here's a halachic question. Let's look in the Talmud. Let's look in Maimonides. Let's work it through. Let's see what the rabbis say over the generations. It's more like, well, let's move with the times. It's not enough for me. On the flip side, the Haredi world is way too much for me, and it doesn't allow me to, as I said before, breathe. So is there confusion within all this? Absolutely. I'm not quite sure where I'm going with this or how to work it, but I am on a road, and that's a good thing.
That's so interesting because there's so, it's a diamond. You just turn it and there's a different facet, right? Like, one of them is, I want rigor. I want this to have a gravitas. And the other one is, I want embodied experience, right? Yeah. So I'm in the renewal movement, right? So we do a retreat called JMR, Jewish Men's Retreat, every year in Connecticut. Almost everybody in this is American, except two of the rabbis who run the service on the Friday and Saturday night are both Canadians, Mark Biller and Sean Zevitt. So, right. So, and Sean, for instance, got smicha from Reb Zalman, Shachter Shalomi, but he also is a Reconstructionist rabbi, and he has a synagogue in Philadelphia, Mishkan Shalom. So it's so interesting because for me, what I found there was that when we get together, 100 men, there are all different levels of observance and all different levels of the profundity of their book Judaism, but there is a commonality of spirit amongst these people, where some men get up and dance in the middle of a Kabbalat Shabbat Friday night service. And I remember I took one of my sons and I said, look, guys are going to get up and dance. That doesn't mean you have to get up and dance. There's not one, they're right and we're wrong if we're sitting. And I play drum while we're in the, so it has a meaning for me. We do things like when you go up for an aliyah at the Torah, you can have one person who puts their tallis on the Torah, but then there's 15 men behind him, one hand on the shoulder of each man, all the way back. And I think to myself, what interests me is innovation in my spiritual life. That doesn't mean I have to choose I'm on this team or that team. It is, what is the best innovation for my experience of my spirit, but also for other people to know that they have permission to be what they're going to be. So we'll have somebody who's got tefillin on a Sunday morning, at the retreat, and somebody else who has never put tefillin on, but they're in the same place, kind of doing the same dance. So but I totally hear the struggle that you talk about, because if you grow up in an Orthodox home, it's in the DNA that there is, even though you're saying I will not do all these things I've been told I have to do, you can't stop yourself from thinking there's a right way and a wrong way, and you're doing the wrong way.
Yes, very much so.
Right, and that can kill you because you're like, but I don't want to do the right way.
Right.
Go the right way.
I'll tell you an interesting thing in light of what you're speaking of, going away on that conference. For the last 5 or 6 years, I've taken a group of 30 or 40 Jews, probably non-Jews as well, into the forest here at Earl Bales Park on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And we've gone deep down a trail, and at the end of that trail are these huge rocks. It's almost biblical in nature. Like the story of Jacob right now is in the Torah, where he lies down with all the rocks around his head. It's almost like that. And we sit on these rocks, and basically I facilitate a Rosh Hashanah and a Yom Kippur service. Now, we do sing songs like Unatana Tokef. We do sing Avinu Malkeinu,
my favorite,
Who wouldn't? Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
We'll sing it at the end, Ralph. But we talk a lot about introspection. We talk a lot about our relationship with others. We talk a lot about our relationship to the spirit, however anyone defines it.
Right.
It's about an hour and a half. And it's by no means is it halachic. If a frum Jew came in there on Rosh Hashanah, like a very, sort of Haredi Jew, they would laugh at me. I've had that experience, but the truth of the matter is the people who go say, number one is, I don't like going to shul on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur.
Right.
I don't like sitting there for 6 hours, 10 hours, 15 hours. I don't understand prayer. I can't read Hebrew.
Right.
So my message to them is prayer comes in different forms. When my sister's husband was murdered, she couldn't pray. And some rabbi very wisely said to her, tears are prayers as well. And that helped her get through it. She would sob and she would feel as though she was having some sort of communication with God. So I bring that to my service and I feel so fulfilled at the end of it. I really do.
Yeah.
And thank God the people who attend it also feel very fulfilled.
Beautiful. That is beautiful.
Yeah,
I mean,
thank you.
I tend to think that a person's life is their prayer, right? Like if you looked at everything that you've done and been through in your life, it is your prayer.
Yes.
Right? Your call, your yearning, your presence is all in there. And all the things, like some of the things you're talking about, the loss of your sister, the loss of a brother-in-law, that's part of the prayer. I have a friend who does wilderness Torah in California, and he just takes people out into the desert, literally the desert. And can you imagine how powerful it is to be doing the desert story in the desert, right?
That's very cool.
Yeah, and he's a renewal rabbi. He had smicha in the Olive Ordination program. But, the more you talk, the more I think, does it matter whether or not you get the shingle that says I'm a rabbi? Because a rabbi is a teacher. It's not just a vocational, business card. It's a way of being. And when you describe that service, I think, well, you're a rabbi. I mean, you're leading this service. You're creating a container for people, right? And that's what a rabbi has to be able to do, is to create a container in which people can be free to be.
Yes.
Right. And it's not like, and by the way, why are you wearing white pants?
Yes.
Like,
good one.
Take a breath. Take a breath.
Ralph, I've always, I'm giving a class tonight to a conversion class. My dear friend Ellie Rubenstein and Rabbi Yossi Saberman started up a conversion class of all denominations.
Nice.
So if you want to convert through Orthodoxy, there's a place for you in this class. If you want to convert through Reconstructionist Judaism, there's a place for you. So tonight I'm giving a class on Jewish identity, and I feel perfectly comfortable with it. I feel as though I've done my work on it and I have something to present. I'm going to work with the people who are on the call to help develop the thesis. But I don't feel, as I used to, I don't feel like I'm faking.
Right.
That's a big piece. I've come a long way that way. The other points I wanted to mention you before, you're right. You're 100% right. I don't need smicha, at the end of my days, but I have a fascination with scholarship. My father, Ralph, was a bibliophile.
So I was about to say, what a coincidence. Maybe your father was like that?
Yeah, maybe. I never thought of it, right? But I mean, he had 10,000 books and Sforim, Jewish books. And the Talmud, they're big, heavy books. My monitor is big, heavy. And every Pesach, my sisters and I would dust each and every book, and we'd get a penny a shelf, So, scholarship was in my DNA, even though I was not a very good student. So now I'm becoming a better student. And I think the whole smicha discussion or idea that I'm having with myself and now you, is more so just a real appreciation for scholarship. I know the Marty Luptions of the world. I know people who are brilliant and just so erudite when it comes to Torah learning and life. Dr. Label Zoberman, he's not only is he a Torah scholar, he knows Greek mythology. He understands the sciences. It's a pleasure to spend time with these people. So I think that's what's drawing me to that idea of smicha.
So there's a very interesting thing, because for me, what keeps me away from something like that is a rabbi gets up and they're doing a sermon, the Devar Torah, and they go to the rabbinical go-to. This word, the 3-letter root of this word that says chicken is really water. And when we think of water, and I just think, and everybody's on the way out the door in their head. But if somebody says to me, what is it that makes the Pharaoh harden their heart? What is it about the tyrant Pharaoh inside you that hardens your heart to freedom? Mm-hmm. So I think in metaphors, I think in the personal struggle of our lives through those biblical stories and through other pieces. So the problem sometimes for me with rabbis is I don't want an academic experience here. I want a spiritual experience, a heart-to-heart experience. And these pieces that I talk of, why is he sleeping on a rock? I mean, his head is on a rock. It's not a Tempur-Pedic rock. It's a rock. Why does he have to, after it's over, have a wound that is permanent? These are the things where I go, okay, so let's now, yes, there are great sources for interpretation. Another problem I would have with that, for instance, would be, hey, wait a minute, every single person you've referred to is a man who has an idea about this. So I'm missing female wisdom, Shekhinah wisdom throughout this conversation because I'm in my books, and my books are men talking to men as men. And so for me, I like to be free of those pieces. I would love to have more knowledge to draw on, but the emotional IQ of a spiritual experience and a sermon to me is deadly important. It's why we bother, why people will actually sing a song in Hebrew, Avinu Malkeinu, and then I'll walk up to them and go, do you know what that means, by the way? And they'll say, no. Mm-hmm. And I say, who cares? Mm-hmm. What do you feel when you're singing? Oh, I remember every year. I remember the sorrow of this song. I remember Kol Nidre. I just think, oh, this is a chance to stop and breathe and be in my life and, share compassion. Do I know what the words mean in English? No. I mean, occasionally I'll read them and forget them, but no. So that balance between, the scholarship and the emotional landscape, to me, I hope you keep that, right? I hope you keep that, because otherwise we get very good at knowing more than the other guy.
Well, I think, I read a beautiful piece from the dean of Yeshiva University, who basically said that, in the old days, when my father was a rabbi, homiletics were a real big deal in Dvar Torahs and speech giving. In other words, a lot of storytelling.
The story is told.
A story is told. Yeah. And then over time, what's happened is, in particular in Orthodox shuls, is the rabbis have moved towards what let's call it scholarship. It's like how much schach should you have on your sukkah, the bushes that you put on the top of the booth, the holiday of booths. How much should you have? And there's an entire Talmud on that. And I studied that Talmud, and it goes back and forth for pages upon pages upon pages about discerning what is the right amount of schach. Can you see through it? Is there enough shade? Is there too much shade?
Another guy's in the corner yelling, you call that a cubit? That's not schmuck. That is not a cubit.
Right. But what I've learned over my Talmud learning is what I've discerned is that indeed, in many ways, God is in the details, right? And I think, strangely enough, in many ways, that is the thing that preserved us. There are so many Talmudic scholars in simple synagogues all over the world. You don't have to find the Beit HaMikdash, the temple, to find the Jewish scholars, the people who know how to answer very difficult halachic questions. They're everywhere. And because they're so ubiquitous, the Jewish world has become very, very rich. You don't need to go far to figure out how to approach this having to do with Judaism. What should a chuppah look like? What are the halachic responsibilities of a rabbi who's writing a ketubah? The certificate for marriage and so on. Judaism takes these things very, very seriously because of the fact that, as I said, God is in the details, that the minutia of life is the thing very often that carries us. You and I have both studied journalism. We both been journalists. We know that the finest journalists are those who have studied their craft. Right. And sometimes that boils down to telling a story really well, but you have to know how to say it. Sometimes you become very soft.
And that's the craft, but the art is keeping your eyes open as a journalist when others close their eyes. As they turn away, you have to keep looking, witnessing. So with rabbinics, I think some of it is the same, because, I mean, it's interesting to hear you say what you just said, because there's the part of you that says, the detail and the halakhic is what keeps us alive. And then in the next breath, you say, but I can't do it. Right? It's not for me. It just rubs me the wrong way that I've got to do everything exactly this way. I mean, it turns into fetish at a certain point.
It can. No, it can.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And it does for many. But it does for many, because at that point, it's about how right am I doing this, as opposed to I'm doing this and that's what's right. So it kind of gets nuts.
Listen, Ralph, my sister said to me yesterday, she has a halachic shaila. She has a question of Jewish law for her rabbi. I said, what is that? She said that she went to her dry cleaners. She gave them her beautiful tablecloth that she uses on Yom Tov, on the Jewish holidays, and he lost it. So she asked her Rav, what is my responsibility as a Jew halachically? What am I able to ask for before I even hear what he's offering me? Am I able to go in there and say, well, you know what? I would have very much appreciated if you'd return the money that it's going to cost to buy a new one, because I'm not going to buy a used one. I need a brand new one for my Jewish holidays. And she takes her Jewish holidays very seriously, making them beautiful for God. Or no, is it that I've had this tablecloth for 3 years? There's 3 years wear on it. There's wine stains on it, right?
Right.
And therefore, no. I'm not going to ask for $300. I can only ask for $200. She does it in a beautiful way, my sister, and she's very authentic about it. And she's very real about it. It's not a fetish for her. It's something which is very, very spiritual in nature, and she takes it very, very seriously.
Right, and it's grounded in ethic too.
Very much so.
Right,
and she's a fine, good person, right?
Right. So that you want to know what the best thing to do is, not what is the codified piece that says you got to do this, you can't do that. So,
correct.
But it's also interesting. All right, I could talk to you forever.
Yeah, me too. So
yeah, we're gonna start a wisdom school together. That's what we'll do.
Won't be the administrator though, Ralph.
No, neither of us. We need that other person to go, okay, listen,
someone else.
Can you, somebody said something about an Excel spreadsheet. I'll start crying if we do an Excel spreadsheet.
I've never heard of it.
Curriculum, I'm all over it, but the Excel spreadsheet, I don't want to do.
I'm there.
All right. Avrum, you have disappeared from the camera, but there you are. Yes, I want to thank you very much for doing this. And I do want to keep in touch. I think there's a lovely journey that you're on. And it's so much that you've done that has been so good. And so walking the walk of life and caring about people, and, all the beautiful things that have been passed on to you and that you're passing on. It's just been a pleasure to just catch up and figure out where you've been and where you're going. So thank you so much for doing this with me.
Yeah, no, and I just wanted to add, let's just do our Merv Griffin thing here for a second. I'm also fascinated by the road that you're on. It's really, really something. Like when I see your Facebook posts nowadays, and you talk about your spiritual journey. I love when I see people who go off on a different sort of a journey or a different road than one might suspect. And to see you go down this sort of rabbinic or quasi-rabbinic sort of trail, I find it fascinating. And what I find even greater is that people are really responding to you beautifully.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's
you're putting yourself out there, and people are saying, "This is good, Ralph. This is good."
Yeah. No, I this book I've written, I Thought He Was Dead, a spiritual memoir, and I thought, as I'm writing it, I'm thinking, I don't know. So people are going to look at this and just go, "What?
Yeah.
No, you? Come on."
Yeah.
And I thought, no, you got to do it. You got to just, you got to jump and grow wings. I mean, it's the way it works, right? I'm Nachshon. I just got to keep walking in the water. We'll see what
dive
happens.
Right into the sea.
Dive right in. Pushed in or walked in, I don't know, but I don't care. Right.
Very
so
good.
thank you for that. Very kind words.
Thank you.
All right. Welcome. You take care.
You too, Ralph. Thank you.
Folks, that's it for Not That Kind of Rabbi. I'm Ralph Ben Mergi. Avrum Rosensweig has been my guest. How can people get in touch with you, by the way?
So they can get in touch with me at avrum.rosensweig@gmail.com. That's avrum.rosensweig, ROSENSWEIG@gmail.com.
Yeah, so don't make the mistake of ZW, Rosensweig.
Yeah,
go for Rosensweig and you'll get it
Thank
right.
You for pointing that.
I know it's like Ben Mergi. Believe me, it's not fun. And my book, I Thought He Was Dead, is available now. Indigo, Amazon, local bookstores will order it for you. And if you want to support this podcast, go to patreon.com/NTKR and look for my Not That Kind of Rabbi. My website is ralphbenmergi.ca, and I have spiritual counseling there as well. So take care of each other, and we'll see you soon. Thanks, Avrum.
Thank you.